And so this is where I want to spend a little bit of time, because there is a really important message here. This is like a mini masterclass in terms of understanding the dynamics of, forcing property prices higher. The first thing I want to talk about is probably this slide down here. This is the time it takes to deliver new apartments. This is the time it takes to deliver new townhouses. And this is the time it takes to deliver houses. Now, that's the construction in terms of those particular things. So up to 35 months for multi-level dwellings, and then up to 15 months for townhouse groups, and then independent houses up to 11 months. Now, why is this important? Well, the way in which I look at this is really simple. This is what we call atypical market. So we're talking about here economic elasticity, or as part of this particular story. So what we see here is this is demonstrating that as demand increases, we can start to see supply increase. So supply becomes elastic. So what's a good example of that? If I've got more demand for footy cards, then they'll make and print more footy cards, right? That's basically, and that's pretty easy to do in real terms. The property market, what you've just learned, is completely different. So it's very, very easy to turn demand on, but unfortunately, supply is very inelastic. And that is a critical point to understand. So, when we do incentivize, buildings and investments and those types of things, if everyone jumps in, the property market has this difficulty in terms of delivering that supply for all the reasons that we've just spoken to you about. And that is really important when you're putting your cap on in regards to whether you're buying a home, to Bryce's point earlier in the presentation, to whether you're actually investing in property. That elasticity is an advantage, and that also accounts for the lack of volatility in terms of how the market moves. And so that really is important. Okay, so we've looked at the supply side. Now let's look at the demand side. So household formation. This is incredible. So we can see here from 1911, you can see in terms of the number, around 4.5 persons per household, and you can see how that moved down into this sort of 2.5 persons per household. Look at this bottom story here in terms of the number of people who want to live independently. Now, that is also trending in an upward direction, and that's their choice. And ultimately, COVID kicked in, which probably potentially accelerated that. That's what we're seeing here in this particular data. But we are starting to see that number come down. And Antonia just mentioned it earlier, where she said share houses, where people are coming together because of affordability reasons or to potentially save up for their own deposit. They're sacrificing by going into share houses to share that rental burden. But here is a number that I want to land on you. In 2016, in terms of household size, we're sitting at 2.59%. Now, today, that number is down at 2.55. All right. Now, in terms of that, so that means there's less people per household. Now, what does that correlate into in terms of extra number of dwelling? It's 160,000 new dwellings that we need, because household formation is smaller than what it was. So the market mechanism will have to adjust itself, where that expectation is going to have to be adjusted, where you're going to see more people living in existing dwellings. Because 160,000 dwellings, we saw that earlier, it's about typical in terms of what we build each year. So even we saw that data in the Keating and Hawke era, in terms of that 150, that hasn't moved much, Bryce. No. It's still between 130 and 170,000 new dwellings that we build each year. So that's 1 year of building. So we're going to talk more about that in terms of some of the solutions that we have in next week's episode. And then obviously what happens when you bring in this record level of immigration and population into this particular market? You find a story where, ultimately we're drinking from a fire hydrant. There's not enough supply available to meet the demand that's coming in. And that's ultimately why you're seeing a situation where traditionally if interest rates go higher, property prices normally, unemployment starts to go lower, and ultimately property prices start to go lower. We have not seen that in this particular cycle in most capital cities, because we've had this underlying demand, and we've had this limited supply, and that has meant that property prices have again been able to sketch out continued growth, and we are definitely coming to a conclusion of that in this part of the cycle, as finally affordability and finally the sort of cost of living and the economy continues to slow with the handbrake that the RBA has put in front of us.
And it's a superpower that this country has, the fact
Yep.
that there's so many people who want to come here. So we got the upside of it because
Yep.
it means that it's largely how we stay out of recession, by bringing more people in, creating that economic stimulus. But the downside of that is you've got an immigration policy that doesn't match your housing policy.
Correct.
So, in one hand, you've got a stronger economy than if you'd left alone.
Yep.
And on the other hand, it means not enough houses being built.